All right, Baldur's Gate 3 came out maybe a week and a half ago now. Yeah, it's been about a week and a half, and I think this is one of the best games I've ever played in my life. I've only put about 50 hours into it so far, and I know that might not sound like a lot considering a lot of YouTubers out there have put like 120 hours in the game in a week. No clue how they did that, by the way. That's very impressive. But having a full-time job, I've tried to play every free minute I get. I've been playing for like 6-hour sessions whenever I do play those, so I make sure I have enough time to really dive deep into the game and it's not just like 30-minute play sessions, because I don't think this is the type of game you can do that with. All that being said, I think this is a generation-defining game. I know that is a very exaggerated statement, and a lot of you guys might not agree considering I haven't even finished the game yet, but it's going to take me months to finish this game, I think. I'm still only in Act 1, towards the end of it, but still only in Act 1, and I have 50 hours in it, and Act 2 is supposed to be even longer than that. All right, so I wanted to give 5 reasons why I do think this is a generation-defining game and why it's one of the best games I've ever played. I'm going to start with number 5, and then we'll make our way to number 1. Number 5 is graphics, and graphics usually aren't the most important aspect of most of the games I play. I can usually forgo like really crappy graphics if the game design is really good. Quick example I can think of is Stardew Valley. I know it's pixel art, but the gameplay is so polished and the game loop, like the cycle of how the game actually works, is so good and addictive that I have put almost 200 hours into that game. I find the graphics in Baldur's Gate 3 to be really good, but I don't think graphics are the most important aspect of any game, so I've put it at number 5. Now, there's a couple of reasons I think graphics are really good. Obviously, you can't compare this game to something like Cyberpunk or even Red Dead Redemption 2. That's not what I mean by really good graphics. What I mean is this game has really good graphics for the genre it is in. So CRPGs as a whole, if you compare it to other games like Pathfinder, Kingmaker, and then even games like Pillars of Eternity, really good graphics, but they're isometric and they're kind of locked into the camera angle you're looking at. So you don't really have 3D rendered assets in the game. Larian Studios has always done a really good job of making even games like this, which are CRPGs, making these games have 3D rendered assets. So what I mean is you can actually rotate the camera, you can zoom into the character, a lot more in Baldur's Gate 3 than you could in Divinity Original Sin 2, but basically this is a 3D game. That's really hard to do with the style of game it is, right? And I think they've done a really good job of really pushing the graphical boundaries for the type of game this is. The other aspect of graphics is actual cutscene. Now the game has over 170 hours of cutscene, so when you are in a cutscene, you can't really tell. Even when you're doing like standard dialogue with another character, in most other games that would be considered a in-game render. That's not the case for Baldur's Gate 3. There's an actual cutscene every time you talk with another character, and because it happens so often, you don't really consider that it is a cutscene. And the cutscenes are so well developed, I think they have to be talked about whenever you're talking about general graphics in Baldur's Gate 3. There's one particular instance I can think of is when you go into maybe like a hotter zone, the characters will actually sweat profusely. And it's very noticeable how the characters' facial details are completely changed in like those environments versus somewhere in more like temperate conditions or like even colder conditions. And I really like that they have that level of detail to like characters' facial animations and facial detail. Okay, so number 4, I want to talk a little bit about the game's length, right? So this game is really, really long. Like I said, I'm only in Act 1. And I've put about 50 hours into the game. When a game is this long, it tends to be really bloated. An example I can think of is like Assassin's Creed games, like the more recent ones, like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Assassin's Creed Origins, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Those games are really, really long. They can be considered bloated. I still like those games. I've platinumed Assassin's Creed Valhalla, for example. And although I enjoyed that platinum, it was through the course of like 2 years, right? I had to hop off the game, come back in a couple months. And the reason for that was because a lot of the content in the game was just very repetitive. For someone who likes, checking things off a checklist, I did enjoy that, but it was a game I had to keep, stepping away from, coming back to. And it wasn't the most enjoyable experience necessarily. This game, on the other hand, has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of gameplay, much bigger than Assassin's Creed Valhalla, but it's still varied, it's still polished, it's still handmade to an extent, and it's not like super repetitive. There is a level of like developer ethics that I feel like comes into play with this, because as a developer, Larian Studios could have made this game completely bloated without the content being super varied. Instead of doing that, what they chose to do is they chose to make the content very diverse. They chose to have a lot of intricate storylines, Even the side quests have a ton of dialogue. And a game that's this big, having accomplished something that's so varied, makes it generation defining on its own. So I think the gameplay length in correspondence with the ethical approach to how long the game is from Larian Studios was just phenomenally done. Okay, so number 3, I want to talk about loot. I love looter shooters. One of my favorite looter shooters is actually Division 2. I played a ton of Destiny 2. I didn't enjoy Diablo that much. I don't know why, but Diablo 4 just didn't do it for me. And Baldur's Gate 3 does that looter shooter kind of gameplay design better than looter shooters. Now, granted, this game does not have as much loot as Diablo or as much loot as Division or even Destiny 2, but the loot that they do have is so well made. Every weapon feels really different. And I'll give you an example. There was even a side quest where you have to craft your own weapon in the first act. And they didn't really have to do that. You're getting handed weapons left, right, and center. There's a ton of variance in the weapons you're kind of running into. But even though that's the case, they had an entire side mission in the first act where you have to find blueprints, you have to find a standard sword to make the weapon even better with the blueprints, and there was just a lot of depth in that side mission to give you that one piece of loot. This was completely optional, by the way, but they did such a good job of making the loot feel like it's something you really achieved. And I love the way they approached the loot in this game, and I think it's one of the best approaches to loot that I've seen in any game out there so far, in any RPG especially. All right, so number 2 is world design and exploration. This is one of my favorite parts of the game. In fact, in my personal opinion, if we leave objectivity to the side, I think this is probably my favorite part of the game. Number 1, I think, might be better for most people, so I put it at number 1. But world design and exploration is probably my favorite part of the game, right? So here's why. This is technically an open world game. It has loading screens in the middle, of course, but I would still call it an open world game. I would compare it to the likes of maybe The Witcher, with a little bit more loading screens, because some underground areas and stuff you have to load the game in for. But you know how Witcher has, The Witcher 3 has like 3 or 4 distinct areas that you can kind of fast travel or teleport to in a way. This is kind of similar. There's multiple areas in the game, and each area you kind of have to teleport to, either by like an elevator or you have to enter a cave or something like that. Even though loading exists in the game, I don't really fault the game for doing it, because the levels that are designed are very detailed. There's a lot of depth to every kind of environment you're going to come across. Being that it's an open world game, it's not like a lot of bloat that's kind of filling the world. It's a lot of detailed like crates that you can kind of go through, and you should explore everything. Every nook and cranny of this world needs to be explored. The reason for that is a lot of times you'll find loot, a lot of times you'll find side missions even. Like for example, towards the beginning of the game, there is a cave that you can go into where there's something called an owlbear who's protecting its child. And this is a mission that I think you might be able to come across because there's some other people chasing this, I guess, monster. But if those people you don't come across, you won't find that bear, or if you don't go into that cave, you won't find that owlbear either. And one of the main reasons you should explore is so you can come across these side missions. So it's not just loot that you're after when you're exploring. Sometimes it's a whole new host of dialogue, a whole new character you can come across. Most of the companions you actually come across, you have to come across through exploration. So I think this game rewards exploration in the best way possible. And you don't necessarily need to explore. You could just go to the objective markers, but that won't really kind of immerse you in the world. And I really believe that anyone who plays this game should love exploration, because it's almost a necessity. Not quite a necessity, but it's almost a necessity for you to be successful in it. All right, so number 1. I think the best thing this game does, objectively, is choices, right? Your choices have actual impact. And the reason I put this at number 1, my favorite part of the game's exploration. And I would be okay with Larian Studios making a very linear game. But they didn't. They made a linear game, and then they made another linear game, and then they made another linear game. And they kept doing this until every player had a choice to have its own, his or her own linear path through the game, right? And not a lot of developers do this. A lot of developers, what they do is they'll have a linear path, and then they'll have maybe 1 or 2 fake paths that kind of lead to the same destination, but it makes you feel like it's different choice the player is making. Larian Studios actually, I feel like, made multiple linear paths that you can take as the player and have a completely different experience each time. I don't think this is possible for a lot of even AAA developers to do, because they just don't even think about making a part of a game that 99% of the players won't experience. That's just very rare for a lot of developers to do. So Larian Studios having done this, making decisions this important, is, I think, a phenomenal decision, and I think makes this game a top tier, S tier game. Choices are something Larian Studios could have completely avoided, but because they have so much depth in your choices, even bad decisions don't feel so bad, because you realize, oh my god, there's a whole different path that I could have taken, but this path is leading me to this, and this. The bad decisions aren't necessarily even dead ends. A lot of times a bad decision will lead to a whole host of different decisions that you have to make. And the level of immersion that this decision making provides is incomparable to any other game out there right now. And I think Larian Studios is probably the best game developer in the modern day for RPGs. I know that's a pretty heavy statement. Starfield's coming out soon. But no matter how good Starfield is, and it might be a better game overall, I don't think they'll do decision making as well as Baldur's Gate 3 did. Alright, hopefully this video is not too long. I wanted to keep it under 5 minutes, but I'm sure that's not going to be the case after editing and everything. If you guys did like the video, think about maybe leaving a like. If you didn't like the video, it's okay if you leave a dislike as well. Just let me know what I could improve, because I'm trying to get better with every video I make. But if you guys really like the video and you like some of my other videos, maybe subscribe. I like making content about games. A lot of times I'll like analyze another gameplay video, or I will just make like a reaction video. So if you're interested in that kind of gaming content, maybe subscribe. But hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Bye.